And we are back. Welcome to my preview and predictions for the Premier League Game Week 32. There are just 7 weeks left to go in the Premier League season, and the first significant result of the Premier League season has now occurred. You will see at the bottom of your screen right there, Southampton are now greyed out because they have sadly been relegated from the Premier League and still currently are on track for the lowest points tally in Premier League history. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about everything else. After what has been a really fascinating week of European action, we return to domestic action once again with 2 videos for you this morning. Firstly, the Premier League video, free to view for all of you guys. And for members only, our next round of La Liga preview and predictions has just gone live as well. And as always, on these Premier League videos, I want to give a massive thank you to the following people for becoming new members, and also for 2 of my already existing members for upgrading to the higher tier of my memberships, giving them access to those La Liga previews and predictions. Make sure you are hitting that join button at the bottom of your screen if you want access to exclusive ad-free videos regarding La Liga and other new series we have got coming up for you over the course of the summer break. But for today, let's move ahead to these Premier League predictions where you'll see the season scores have been updated after the European games. Actually, a pretty good week in Europe. 3 out of 4 in the Champions League and the Conference League. 2 out of 4 in the Europa League. And a couple of correct scores in there as well. And 6 out of 10 for the Premier League last week. A return to form in terms of my Premier League predictions, successfully considering I said how difficult a week it would be to call last week. But let's be honest, this week isn't going to be much easier. And we start things off, as always, with the early kickoff on Saturday, and it is Manchester City taking on Crystal Palace in the early kickoff. And we have to ask the question right here, right now, how much do Manchester City really want this right now? Because let's be honest, it was one of the worst Manchester derbies any of us have ever seen. I can understand it from a Manchester United perspective. Their focus was always going to be that Europa League quarter-final against Lyon taking place last night. So I didn't expect Manchester United to go all guns blazing. But Manchester City are in a serious race for the top 5 right now. They are not guaranteed Champions League football as things stand. And they seriously did not look up for it whatsoever. However, the fact that they did manage to get a point at Old Trafford means that they do come into this game against Crystal Palace 4 games unbeaten. Crystal Palace, on the other hand, arguably wanted to win that M23 derby far too much, and certainly Eddie Nketiah and Mark Gahey were showing far too much action going into their challenges whilst already on a yellow card, both of them being sent off in that match. However, they still came out victorious, meaning that they are now 8 games unbeaten in all competitions. And coming into this game against Manchester City, Palace do actually have a fairly good head-to-head record against them as well. They drew 2-2 at home to Manchester City earlier on this season. They also drew 2-2 at the Etihad last season. But it has to be noted that I think without Gahey in that back line, and with it looking like Chris Richards is also still going to be injured in that back line, I do see Palace struggling defensively in this one against a City side which, like I say, they're currently 6th in the table. It's going to be top 5 after how well the English teams did in Europe this week, and Manchester City aren't in there yet. Obviously, there's still no Erling Haaland for them, but surely they need to take advantage of Crystal Palace's defensive absentees. I'm going to go for City, but I have very, very little confidence over it. Don't be surprised to see Crystal Palace get another result against City here, but I'm going for a very narrow 2-1 win to kick things off for Manchester City. Crystal Palace were not the only team to have players sent off in the M23 derby. Brighton also saw Van Hecke pick up a red card for, to be honest, what probably could have been a straight red card anyway. It was a last man challenge, and of course, after his red card, they did end up losing 2-1, although his red card was right at the end of the game, meaning it's actually 4 games without a win in succession for Brighton and Hove Albion right now. Unfortunately, though, Leicester are doing significantly worse than that. It is 9 defeats in a row for Leicester City, 7 games in a row without scoring. But the reason why I mentioned Van Hecke being sent off is because it seriously leaves Brighton's defence depleted. Basically, they only realistically have Lewis Dunk available to them as a fit centre-half. They're going to have the likes of Webster, Igor, Van Hecke, Veltman, all out with injuries and suspensions for this one. They're still missing the likes of Lamptey and Milner and Kalioglu, available from the fullback positions as well. So their defence is seriously depleted right now. So it is actually a chance for Leicester to capitalise on that. And to be fair, they have scored in all of their previous 9 meetings against Brighton. And they drew 2-2 at home in the reverse fixture earlier on this season. And they have no fresh injury or suspension concerns coming into this one. Question you've got to ask yourself is, will that 15-year-old Jeremy Monga start this game after he looked fairly dangerous off the bench for them? Ultimately, even with all of that in their favour, I still don't see Leicester getting anything from this match. I know Brighton haven't won in their last 4, but they're still 9th in the Premier League table. They're still arguably in a race for the European places as well. And against a side that is on the verge of relegation, you would have to fancy Brighton to get the result at home. However, I am going to give Leicester a goal. 3-1, I'm going to go to Brighton. Leicester finally able to get themselves a goal. And who knows, depending on if they score that goal first, maybe they go on and get a result. But I'd be very shocked to see that happen. Surely Brighton end up winning this one. Next up, it is Nottingham Forest taking on Everton. And as things stand, Nottingham Forest are 5 points clear of Manchester City in 6th place in the race for those Champions League places. And obviously, they will know how much that gap has moved by the time kickoff comes around, because the game against Crystal Palace would have already finished by the time they kick off. Their unbeaten run came to an end at Villa Park as predicted last week, and they'll be looking to bounce back against an Everton side that, despite playing well, actually have failed to win any of their last 6 matches in all competitions, but to be fair to them, have drawn 5 of those 6, including that draw with Arsenal last weekend. To be fair, rather than there actually being any fresh injury or suspension concerns coming into this one, it's actually better to look at the potential players that could be returning for both sides. It looks like the likes of Chris Wood and Awoniyi could be facing late fitness tests for Nottingham Forest, and either, if not both, could be available for this game. Equally, both could still miss. Same for Anthony Elanga. He went off at half-time last week, but as things stand, it looks like he should be back and available for Forest. As for Everton, again, no fresh injury concerns, but Dwight McNeil could finally be back and available to make a first start for basically 4 months coming into this game. To be honest, I actually just think that this game really suits how Nottingham Forest play. I wouldn't surprise me to see another 0-0 here, given that we know Forest like to sit back, try and hit on the counter-attack, but Everton obviously very defensively solid under David Moyes as well. But like I say, I think if Forest play this game right, I think the worst result for them is going to be a draw here. I would still expect Forest to come out on top. They've had a very good season. They're pushing hard for these Champions League places, and I think they're going to get another result that they need here in that bid for success. But don't rule Everton out that easily. I'm going to go for a narrow 1-0 win to Nottingham Forest. Then we have the side that is sadly already relegated. It is Southampton taking on Aston Villa. And for the second time this season, Simon Rusk will be taking charge of Southampton, whose winless run now stretches to 7 games after that defeat to Tottenham last week. For Villa, they're just going to be hoping that Southampton players don't know how to do significant fake shots after what happened to them in the Champions League in midweek. And I have to say, I was a little bit gutted for them, because I think if they'd have taken a 2-1 back to Villa Park, there was definitely a game still to play for. Unfortunately, though, that last-minute goal from Nuno Mendes really does make it difficult for them in their bid to try and get through to those Champions League semi-finals. But they still have a chance to qualify for the Champions League from the Premier League, and they do have a very good squad available to them, to the extent that I do think they could change their entire starting lineup here and still field a side basically as strong as what their usual starting lineup would be. And against a Southampton side who, again, to be fair, we don't really know how they're going to line up either, because Simon Rusk might decide to completely change the style of play and the personnel in the team. So really, there's a lot up in the air when it comes to the actual team selection for both of these sides. However, I do think Aston Villa should still be considered strong favourites for this. Like I said, Unai Emery is going to want to get back in the Champions League for next season. I don't think he's going to want to risk it too much in regards to the fact that he'd make changes ahead of the second leg. So I'm still going to go for Aston Villa. What is worth noting is that the last 3 meetings between these sides have all finished 1-0. But I'm actually going to opt for that trend to be broken here. I am going to go for Aston Villa to win it a bit more comfortably than 1-0. I'm going to go for a 3-1 victory to Aston Villa. Now for the final game on Saturday, and it is Arsenal taking on Brentford. And what an unbelievable few days it has been for Arsenal fans following that incredible 3-0 victory over Real Madrid. Let's be honest, it could have been and arguably should have been even more than 3-0 with Thibaut Courtois having an absolute blinder. But I mean, I don't know how Arsenal fans are feeling. As a Manchester United fan that is desperate for Liverpool to not win the league, I'm absolutely fuming at Arsenal after the performance I saw from them against Real Madrid, because where has that performance been for the last few weeks when Liverpool have been slipping up left, right and centre? Unfortunately, it's been Arsenal that have been slipping up just as much in this title race, and if anything, have ended the title race by drawing at Everton last week. But who knows? With that new momentum, who knows? Could they win all their remaining games for the rest of the season? Could they still stop Liverpool winning their Premier League title? Let me know down in the comment section below. But they're coming up against a Brentford side who, let's be honest, are going to be ruining missed chances against Chelsea last week. They had plenty of opportunities to win that football match, but it didn't quite happen for them. It was a 0-0 draw. The problem they've got coming into this game at the Emirates is they have failed to win on every single trip to the Emirates so far. Arsenal have a very positive record at home to Brentford, and they also won the reverse fixture 3-1 earlier on this season. To be fair, there are going to be opportunities for Brentford because I still expect Mikel Arteta to make changes to his starting lineup for this match. Firstly, because like I said, I think the title race is already over, and I don't think Arteta is going to want to risk any of his key players in a game like this, especially with the Real Madrid second leg to come. I think even with a 3-0 lead, it makes more sense just to rest key players, especially given that Bukayo Saka and Declan Rice both went off towards the end of that first leg. I'd be surprised to see either of them in the squad for this one. For Brentford, no fresh injury concerns whatsoever, and it looks like Janssen is going to be back and available to them as well. So, like I say, I do think there is an opportunity for Brentford to get a result here, but with the confidence given from that Real Madrid result, I would still expect Arsenal to get the win. Don't forget though, Brentford were on a run of 5 away wins in a row before their previous away defeat to Newcastle. I'm going to play it safe. I'm going to go for Arsenal, but if you see that starting lineup and it's not one you like, I would steer clear of Arsenal here. I'm going for a 2-1 victory to Arsenal. Let's then take us on to Sunday, and we have 3 early kickoffs on Sunday. The first of those sees Chelsea taking on Ipswich, and to be honest, this is now a must-win match for both sides. Chelsea, of course, currently sit in 4th place, but the race for those Champions League places in the top 5 is getting closer and closer by the week. And following that 0-0 draw against Brentford, they're going to need to re-establish themselves in this race. And what better team to do it against than an Ipswich side that are seriously on the verge of relegation. Chelsea, of course, backed up that 0-0 draw with an impressive 3-0 away win to Legia Warsaw last night in the Europa Conference League. And the good news for them in regards to that is that tie is now essentially over, meaning that they can play their strongest available lineup for this one. For Ipswich, I mean, they just blew it, didn't they? I think even the most hardcore Ipswich fan has got to sit there and say they blew it against Wolves last week. Going ahead, sitting back too early, inviting pressure, and eventually they were punished, not once but twice. It ended up in a 2-1 defeat. It means they're now 12 points behind Wolves with just 7 games to go. And look, if you're someone that still thinks that Ipswich are in the battle for survival, then you must also think Arsenal are in the title race, because it's the same points difference. Actually, it's more of a point difference from between Wolves and Ipswich than it is from Arsenal to Liverpool. But we'll see. I just don't see it happening now for Ipswich. To be fair, at least they have no fresh injury or suspension concerns. And not only that, they did win the reverse fixture at Portman Road 2-0 earlier this season over Chelsea. For Chelsea, again, there are some doubts over Cole Palmer. He did go off at half-time in that Europa Conference League game against Legia when the scoreline was 0-0. But Enzo Maresca did say in his press conference that was always the plan. But I don't know, something didn't seem right about it to me. So we'll see if Cole Palmer plays in this one. I would expect the likes of Nicholas Jackson to return though, because he didn't play at the weekend or against Walsall. So surely he is going to be back leading the line here. To be honest, I expect Chelsea to win this one. They are playing some decent football at the moment. Their scorelines have not been as amazing as you'd expect, But with this Champions League race on, I'd be expecting him to get a result against Ipswich. I'm going for a 2-0 victory to Chelsea, which then takes us to the top of the Premier League table, which sees Liverpool taking on West Ham United. This is actually the third meeting of Liverpool and West Ham so far this season. In the Premier League, it was a 5-0 victory to Liverpool at the London Stadium. In the EFL Cup, it was a 5-1 victory to Liverpool at Anfield. However, both of those matches were against Julian Lopetegui's West Ham United, not Graham Potter's. So potentially there is some remit to say that this game might go slightly differently. However, this has been a pretty decent week for Liverpool. Not necessarily on the pitch. Obviously, again, losing to Fulham, making it 3 defeats in their last 4 matches. However, the news that it looks like both Mohamed Salah and Virgil van Dijk are going to be staying. And, of course, Conor Bradley coming back in that second half against Fulham, almost single-handedly changing that match and allowing Liverpool to get themselves back into that game. I do think there's a lot of things going in Liverpool's favour coming into this match. For West Ham, they only were able to draw at home to Bournemouth, meaning that they've not won any of their last 4. At least Liverpool won the 1 game out of those 4 that they didn't lose. No fresh concerns for them either, but I just don't see it happening. They've got a terrible record against Liverpool in recent times. And like I say, with Conor Bradley back at right back, they're going to have a lot more balance in that Liverpool team. Their overall morale is going to be boosted by the Salah and Van Dijk news. They obviously don't want to let this Premier League title slip. Although, to be honest, I think Arsenal are doing enough of a job to make sure that doesn't happen anyway. But I expect Liverpool to win here. I'm going for a 2-0 victory to Liverpool. The final early kickoff on Sunday sees Wolves taking on Tottenham, and it is now 3 wins in a row for Wolves. And of course, that victory over Ipswich, in my opinion, now means that they are going to survive the Premier League this season. As for Tottenham, it was victory over Southampton last week, but that was only followed up by a 1-1 draw in the Europa League last night against Eintracht Frankfurt, despite hitting the woodwork on multiple occasions. And look, I don't see a lot happening with Spurs at the moment. And with that result last night, it would not surprise me to see Ange Postecoglou make changes for this game, because kind of similar to another side we're going to talk about in a moment, 14th in the Premier League table, they're not really playing for anything here. So what is the point in risking players in a game against Wolves when that all-important second leg is coming up in just a few days' time? Not only that, it looked like Udogie picked up yet another injury with a few minutes to go last night. He went off and Jed Spence was forced to come on for the final few minutes of the game. No fresh injury or suspension concerns for Wolves. They'll just be hoping that Strand Larsen continues the run of form which has seen him essentially carry Wolves to safety over the last few weeks. Not only that, Wolves actually have a very good head-to-head record against Spurs. They're unbeaten in all of their last 4 matches against Spurs. They drew 2-2 away at Spurs earlier on this season and have won their last 2 home matches against Spurs as well. I expect that good run of form to continue, especially if Spurs do make those changes to their starting lineup ahead of that second leg against Eintracht Frankfurt. I'm going for a 2-1 victory to Wolves. And then it's time for the main event. And it is Newcastle taking on Manchester United. And I'm still annoyed about last night. Check out my post-match reaction to the Lyon-Manchester United game where at least we found our goal-scoring form once again. It's just a shame that Andre Onana forgot where his hands were once again. And unfortunately, it was a 2-2 draw for United last night. But again, it was another poor performance, especially off the back of what was a really dreary Manchester derby where, again, Manchester United didn't really look that creative. For Newcastle, they've won their last 4 games in a row, including, of course, that League Cup final. They're scoring goals for fun. They're playing good football. They're also on a run of form against Manchester United, which has seen them win 4 of the last 5, including winning 2-0 at Old Trafford earlier on this season. Not only that, Anthony Gordon is going to be back and available for them, at least for Manchester United's sake. They've got Kobbie Mainoo back and available to them now. He came on last night. But again, like I just said about Spurs, the scoreline is 2-2 in the Europa League. That is all that matters to Manchester United right now. I don't think Ruben Amorim is going to make wholesale changes to his starting lineup, but I don't see the United players overexerting themselves when the priority will be that game at Old Trafford against Lyon on Thursday night. I would be stunned to see any other result than a Newcastle win here. But even as a United fan, it wouldn't bother me too much to see us lose this one. I'm going for a 2-0 victory to Newcastle. And then finally, the Monday Night Football sees Bournemouth taking on Fulham. For Bournemouth, it was a return to form for Evan Nilsson last week. He scored both goals in the 2-2 draw away at West Ham. But that draw now means it's 8 games without a victory for Bournemouth, without penalties. But still, 8 games without a victory in normal time. For Fulham, they were able to put in a great performance and a great victory over Liverpool last week at Craven Cottage. A real surprise in my opinion. But do you know what? Fair play to them. They stepped up, they capitalised on Liverpool's poor run of form. And now they come up against the Bournemouth side, who are also on an incredibly poor run of form. So I think there is definitely a chance Fulham come away with yet another victory here. What that result also means for them is that with them sitting in 8th place and the news that the Champions League places has been moved out to 5th place, that Fulham are now only 5 points themselves off the Champions League places coming into this weekend. And obviously they'll get to see how all the other teams perform ahead of their game on Monday night. No fresh injury concerns for either side coming into this one. For Bournemouth, they'll just be desperate that they can get Justin Kluivert back. He's been a massive miss for them over the last couple of weeks. To be fair, the reverse fixture was a 2-2 draw, and I've not gone for a single draw throughout the entirety of this video so far. And I have to say, I do kind of fancy another draw here, and the same scoreline of 2-2 is looking pretty appealing to me. I can honestly see all 3 results available to me in this one. If either side plays to their full potential, they should end up getting the win. So I think a draw is just about right. So let's round off this video with the same scoreline as it was earlier on this season. A 2-2 draw between Bournemouth and Fulham. And that is going to be it for today's video. As always, let me know all your thoughts down in the comments section below. Let me know anything you think I've missed. Don't forget to drop a like of it if you do enjoy all of my prediction series. Subscribe with notifications turned on so you don't miss out on any of the other series we have for you over the course of the next few weeks for the remainder of this season. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you very soon.